All right, here we are for another episode of The Liz Wheeler Show. It is good to see you all. I hope you had a restful and fun weekend. I also hope you noticed the title of today's episode because I'm personally very excited to do this episode. I think there are a lot of questions that need to be answered about the FBI's recent arrest last Thursday. Kash Patel, FBI director, and his deputy director, Dan Bongino, announced the arrest of Brian Cole Jr. They claim that Brian Cole Jr. is the real pipe bomber. But there are a lot of questions in a lot of people's minds. Maybe you have some questions. I also have some questions. We are going to analyze whether Brian Cole is the real pipe bomber or not. Are there holes in this story? Is this substantiated by solid evidence? Because the implications of actually uncovering the identity of the pipe bomber are absolutely enormous. So we are going to get to that in just a moment. If you have an opinion about whether Brian Cole Jr. is the real pipe bomber or not, please drop it in the comment section. I am very curious about what you all think of this. Before we get to, is this the real pipe bomber? Two quick things to cover first. Last week, I did an episode about the conservative influencers who had been paid by Qatar to travel to Qatar. And then after their trip, huge coincidence, they posted very flowery, seemingly propaganda on behalf of Qatar and what a wonderful country it is, yada, yada, yada. And it seemed very inauthentic. It seemed like they were paid to post positively about Qatar. And we did an episode on it. We sat and talked about it because, as I said to you last week, I don't often like to weigh into infighting among conservatives. I think mostly that just distracts from us fighting the left. I don't often weigh into gossipy topics. However, I think the reason that it's very important that we continue to discuss conservative influencers being paid by Qatar is best exemplified by a response I got to that episode. And I want to be perfectly fair here. One of the influencers whom I named in last week's episode, Emily Saves America. As I said last week, I'm actually not sure what her last name is, but that's what her handle is online. She responded to my episode, and I want you to see what her response is. I want to give her a platform to make her case. This is what she posted after the episode. She quote tweeted a clip of the episode that was going viral on X after we had published that episode. And this was her response to the portion of the video that we posted was pointing out that Qatar funds terrorism, either directly or indirectly. Qatar has funded ISIS, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood, and terror groups in Syria and Yemen and all across the Middle East. And these individuals wish death and destruction on all non-Muslims, especially Americans, in the name of jihad. And these conservative influencers are taking money from them, serving as propaganda mouthpieces for them. And Emily Saves America responded. This was her defense. This is what she said. Quote, Qatar is a tourist destination. They hold all the top sporting events. They love tourism and want as much of it as possible. If I felt that at all, I would have come back and been honest about it. Now, when she says, if I felt that at all, I believe what she's referring to is if she had felt my factual analysis that Qatar funds terrorism. I believe that's what she's referring to when she said, if I felt that they funded terror at all, I would have come back and been honest about it. And so here's my question to Emily Saves America and the other influencers. If you don't feel the terrorism financing when you're visiting Qatar on the dime of the Qatari government, is that terror financing not real? Because of course it is. Of course, it's factually documented that Qatar funds terrorism. Maybe next time that Emily Saves America travels to Qatar, paid for by Qatar, she can ask to be put up in a hut with the Taliban so that she feels the terrorism a little more tangibly, if that's going to help convince her that Qatar really does fund terror. All this being said, the reason that I brought this up today is not just to give her response, which, as you can see, is not much of a response. I wanted to allow her the platform to give her response, but also the reason that I'm actually talking about this is not just because I care about what one or two, D-list level conservative commentator does with his or her time. The reason that it's important and that it matters is because a decade and a half ago, when conservative new media first came onto the scene and challenged the monopoly of the mainstream media, the reason that we challenged the monopoly of the mainstream media is because the mainstream media was dishonest. They were propagandists. They were manipulative. They were trying to feed you cherry-picked information in order to inform how you feel about issues and morals so that you would take their side politically, the left's side politically. And it was just downright dishonest and people didn't like it. So when the new right-wing media, the independent media came onto the scene to challenge the mainstream media, we didn't have better equipment or better technology or better sources. We had no superior apparatus or institution through which to challenge the mainstream media. We had one thing to offer that the mainstream media didn't have to offer, and that was trust. If you watch us, we said, if you listen to us, if you follow us, then you know you'll be getting the truth. And you won't be getting the truth if you listen to the mainstream media. If you watch us, you will be getting the facts. You'll be getting reality. You won't be gaslit. You won't be scolded. You won't be manipulated. We're not engaging in social engineering at your expense. We respect you, and we want you to hear what's real. That is the primary commodity that we had to offer against the mainstream media monopoly. And that trust, telling the truth, honesty, is so valuable that even though at the time we did not, again, have superior technology or equipment or, staffing, resources, at sourcing at that time, even though we were, working on a shoestring back in the day, the fact that we could be trusted, that we're honest, that there were people of integrity, that we weren't bought and sold like mainstream media organizations were, that made us successful because people want to be able to trust presenters and podcast hosts and cable news hosts and anybody who purportedly reports the truth. They want actual accuracy. And when Emily Saves America and Rob Smith go to Qatar and post these flowery posts, these defenses of Qatar that are entirely devoid of the reality of what Qatar does, funding terrorism, radical Islamist terrorism all around the world, it erodes that trust. And it's not just a matter of Emily Saves America eroding her own credibility or Rob Smith eroding his own credibility. Again, if that were the case, I probably wouldn't care that much. But the fact of the matter is, there is a generalized perception towards right-wing media. We're held to a higher standard than the mainstream media. If we get something wrong, if there's an error, the level of trust that is expected of us is entirely. And when certain individuals, like Emily Saves America and Rob Smith, destroy that trust, I am sorry to say that the result is a tainted perception of the entire conservative commentariat. And that's not a good thing. In fact, the result of that, if it is not nipped in the bud, will be some of our viewership, our relationship with you, the trust that you extend to us as a whole, will be ceded back to the mainstream media, which is counter to the anti-monopoly crusade we all set out on together over the past decade and a half. That's why this topic is so important. That's why it matters. That's why it's not just gossip. It's not just infighting. We have to protect trust. We have to protect the integrity of what we report, because every time we make a mistake, every time there's somebody who doesn't tell the truth, who's being manipulative, who's bought and paid for, it takes away the value from the value of what we offer compared to the bigger media organizations. And that would be an absolute tragedy if right-wing media was thus damaged. All right. That was one of the two things that I wanted to talk about quickly before getting to our analysis of, is Brian Cole Jr. the real pipe bomber? The case for him is interesting. The case against him is also interesting. We're going to talk first, though, about the hepatitis B vaccine and what this announcement coming from the CDC, and then President Trump also commented on it, what this really means, because it's being a little unfairly portrayed, even on the right. But first, I want to thank today's sponsor, Cozy Earth. Listen, I have almost all of Cozy Earth's products, and I cannot speak highly enough of them. I love them. I have their towels, and I'm talking bath sheets, bath towels, hand towels, washcloths. I have their bed sheets. Their bamboo bed sheets are heavenly. I have their pajamas in both the shorts and the short sleeve and the long pants and the long sleeve. I have their plush cuddle blanket, which is divine. I have never used a Cozy Earth product that I did not immediately fall in love with, which is why I highly recommend. Listen, we're kind of getting down to the wire when it comes to getting Christmas gifts for our family members. And if you're anything like me, you haven't bought a single gift yet. Well, here you go. Here is the idea of a lifetime. Give the gift of everyday luxury this holiday season. If you go to CozyEarth.com and you use my code Liz, you will get up to 40% off. But you have to be sure to place your order by December 12th for guaranteed Christmas delivery. So if you are a little delayed in your Christmas shopping like me, this is your impetus. This is your kick in the pants. Go get Cozy Earth. But you have to do it before the 12th. Don't worry, though. If you miss that deadline, you can still use my code Liz. It still works year round for 20% off, but 40% is better, so you might want to go before the 12th. CozyEarth.com/Liz. Highly recommend as a Christmas gift for any family member. Okay, so I had an interesting experience with the hepatitis B vaccine that I've told you guys about this story before, but I was reminded of it over the weekend because the ACIP committee, which is essentially recommends to the CDC what immunizations should be included on the childhood recommended immunization schedule. They cast a vote about the hepatitis B vaccine, and they voted to change the childhood recommended immunization schedule from what it currently is. Now, the hepatitis B vaccine, for those who are uninitiated, it is right now recommended by the CDC to be given to newborns on the day of their birth. It is part of the ritual of post-birth in the hospital that they try to vaccinate your brand new baby with the hepatitis B vaccine. And a lot of parents, myself included, don't think this is a good idea. And we've been speaking out against this for a long time. Well, finally, the CDC has caught up to us. And like I said, I know we've talked about this on the show before, and there are a lot of you who did the same thing that I did, which is decline the hepatitis B vaccine on the day of my daughter's birth. But this is what ACIP, the CDC committee, this is a video of their vote to stop recommending the hepatitis B vaccine to babies on the day of their birth. Take a look.
Let's proceed to vote then. I'm going to call the roll. Dr. Pollack, on vote on question 2, yay or nay, and whether you have COI.
Raymond Pollack, I vote no, and no conflicts of interest.
Dr. Stein.
Catherine Stein, no conflicts of interest, and I abstain.
Abstain. Dr. Levy.
Ratzef Levy, I vote yes, no conflicts of interest.
Dr. Pebsworth.
Vicki Pebsworth, no conflicts of interest, I vote yes.
Dr. Malone, no COI, yay. Dr. Griffin.
Dr. Griffin, no conflicts of interest, I vote yes.
Dr. Blackburn.
Hillary Blackburn, no conflicts. I support looking at studies. I vote no on this language.
Dr. Pagano.
Dr. Pagano, no conflicts, yes.
Dr. Meissner.
I vote no.
COI?
I have no conflict of interest, strong no.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Hiblin. Dr. Hiblin, you're on mute again. I appreciate that you do that, but we need to hear your voice. You're still muted, Dr. Hiblin.
Thank you, sir.
There we go.
Thank you for your acknowledgement. I will try to improve my behavior. I have no conflicts of interest, and I vote no.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Milhound.
Hi, Kirk Milhound, no conflicts of interest. I vote yes.
Okay, what is our head count DFO? One moment. So we have a vote for the record of 6 in favor, 4 opposition, and 1 abstain. The motion passes.
The motion passes. First of all, that absolutely cracks me up, by the way, that he couldn't figure out how to get his mute button to turn off. It reminds me of that lawyer that couldn't remove the cat filter. Do you guys remember that video? Hilarious. 6-4. The ACIP committee recommends to the CDC that they change the childhood immunization schedule so that the hepatitis B vaccine is no longer recommended for babies on the day of their birth. Of course, if the mother of that baby tests negative for hepatitis B. And mothers who get prenatal care are tested for hepatitis B. So this is almost a universal thing that is tested. Okay. So I, of course, am very happy about this. This has been my position for a long time. I thought that this was a completely unnecessary vaccine, because if you as a mother don't have hepatitis B, then why does your baby on the day of their birth need the hepatitis B vaccine? There is no logical, and I think there's like a Snopes article somewhere or a factcheck.org article somewhere that quote unquote debunks my position. I've said this sentence before. There is no logical reason to give a newborn baby on the day of their birth the hepatitis B vaccine if the mother tests negative for hepatitis B. It doesn't make any sense. And I don't just preach this. I put this into practice. I will never, ever forget on the day of my oldest daughter's birth, I'm in the hospital room. I declined the hepatitis B vaccine for her. And the hospital, after I declined the vaccine, they send a perinatologist into my room. Now, a perinatologist is an OBGYN with like 2 or 3 additional years of training for high risk pregnancies. And they're supposed to be like the expert's expert. They send a perinatologist to my room that tells me how important it is for me to give my daughter this vaccine. And I say to her, why? I don't have Hep B. And this doctor hems and haws and hems and haws. And finally, she says to me, well, when you drive home from the hospital tomorrow after you're discharged, you might get in a car accident on your drive home, and your newborn baby might need a blood transfusion, and that blood might be contaminated with hepatitis B. I kid you not. Word for word, what this perinatologist says to me on the day of my daughter's birth. And I kick myself to this day that I did not have the wherewithal, despite the fact that I was a couple of hours post giving birth, to look at her and say in like the most deadpan affect ever, exactly how many times a year does that exact scenario occur? I wish that I had said that to her. I, of course, did not think of that witty comeback until afterward, because the answer to my question is, of course, 0. That never happens. That was a ridiculous, manipulative, unscientific thing for her to say to me to try to coerce me into giving my daughter the hepatitis B vaccine, which I did not do. But it does, of course, show that the so-called experts and the so-called science are corrupted. They are, as they have been for a long time, they are bought and paid for by Big Pharma, who seeks to profiteer by exploiting your vulnerable children and you in moments of vulnerability. And so I believe that this is a victory for moms and children everywhere. However, I will say, at the same time, there's a slight caveat to our celebrations here. It's not like the CDC is going to, or it's not like they changed their recommended immunization schedule and removed the hepatitis B vaccine from the schedule. They actually did not do away with it. They're simply recommending that it be delayed by 2 months. So instead of a 1-day-old baby getting this vaccine, they're now recommending that parents make this decision at the 2-month mark for their baby. So it's not entirely the victory that it's being portrayed to be. There will be a lot of babies who aren't at risk of hepatitis B because they're babies. They're not engaging in promiscuous sexual activity with prostitutes or using intravenous drugs, which is how hepatitis B is passed, who will still be subject to this series of shots. And you know my opinion on that. There's also a history of corruption with the hepatitis B vaccine itself. Of course, it doesn't make sense to give this to small children, because I've had friends who've had pediatricians tell them, well, your child may, trip and fall on the playground and be accidentally stabbed with a contaminated intravenous drug, like a drug needle, and get hepatitis B from that. That's what they're told. But the truth of the matter is, the big pharma operatives never intended this for small children until they realized that parents weren't going to opt in and give this to their children when their children were teenagers, because most parents, I think, would look at their innocent little 12 or 13-year-old and say, well, this child is not having sex with prostitutes nor shooting up heroin in the back alley. I don't think that she needs this vaccine. And because that was the reality, the CDC ACIP at the time that this was approved said, well, if adults won't go for the shots, then give them to the children. And Dr. Malone, of course, provided the receipts for that. This was something that was admitted at the time. It just wasn't widely reported on because the mainstream media and journalists are bought and paid for by Big Pharma. And so they don't question Big Pharma. Now, the exciting part of this, and I know I said good thing, caveat, there is another good thing. President Trump is very interested in the vaccine schedule. He posted after the vaccine committee voted. And he said, today, the CDC vaccine committee made a very good decision to end their hepatitis B vaccine recommendation for babies, the vast majority of whom are at no risk of hepatitis B, a disease that is mostly transmitted sexually or through dirty needles. The American childhood vaccine schedule long required 72 jabs for perfectly healthy babies, far more than any other country in the world and far more than is necessary. In fact, it's ridiculous. Many parents and scientists have been questioning the efficacy of this schedule, as have I, the president writes. That is why I have just signed a presidential memorandum directing the Department of Health and Human Services to fast track a comprehensive evaluation of vaccine schedules from other countries around the world and better align the U.S. vaccine schedule so it is finally rooted in the gold standard of science and common sense. I'm fully confident Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the CDC will get this done quickly and correctly for our nation's children. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Maha, the President of the United States says. Now that, my friends, is good news because, listen, when Bobby Kennedy was sworn into office as Secretary of HHS, I wanted him to be absolutely based and savage. Like everything that he ever wrote in a book, make it happen at HHS. We haven't seen that yet. There's an incrementalism to Bobby's strategy that, listen, you can make the argument that incremental change is what sticks, or you can be frustrated by it. I would say I'm more on the side of let's get things done a little more radically, a little more paradigm shifting changes. However, there is also great value in just giving parents implicit permission to question the schedule, which is what President Trump is doing by posting that. And it's what the CDC committee has done by their vote. Even if the next administration reverses it, there are going to be moms across the country. And I know this because I have many friends who weren't really Maha before COVID, who maybe vaccinated their children fully before COVID, who now feel perfectly comfortable. It's perfectly socially acceptable for parents to make that decision. So even if we haven't seen quite the paradigm shifting radical reform and savagery that I was hoping that we would see at HHS under Bobby Kennedy, there is a cultural difference that is being woven into the fabric of our nation that the next administration, or the next, probably won't be the next, but the next liberal administration won't be able to undo just with CDC committee votes, if that makes sense. Okay, now we are finally 20 minutes into the show. I say at the beginning, 2 quick things before we get to the pipe bomber, and before you know it, we're 20 minutes into the show. But we need to do this analysis of the pipe bomber because there are a few questions that I have about the identity of this man that was arrested by Kash Patel's FBI agency. Is he the real pipe bomber? Is he? We're going to analyze it in just a second. But first, I want to give a shout out to All Family Pharmacy. I am proud to partner with All Family Pharmacy because they are a resource to help you and me stand against Big Pharma and against the politicians who try to control our choices and erode our medical freedom. Listen, I do not want Dr. Fauci or Big Pharma or some elected congressional representative telling me what medicine works for me. I want to make that decision myself in consultation with my healthcare providers. And All Family Pharmacy actually gives you the power to do that. They have over 300 medications on their website. It's very easy. You go to allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz. You search for your medication. Once you find it, you order it. A licensed physician reviews your prescription. It is then shipped to you discreetly and quickly in the comfort of your own home. So you get to skip all the corruption. You get to skip the gatekeeping. You get to skip the lines at the clinics. You get to skip all of that. They give you the choice. Visit allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz. And listen, it's Christmas season. There's a lot of sickness going around. You might want to stock up on some medications that you're anticipating you might need for your family this time of year. Check them out, allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz. And if you use my code Liz10, you will save 10%. allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz, code Liz10. Okay, let's get to the question of the day. Is this the real pipe bomber? Before we get started, I want to know what you think. Please go to the comment section if you are watching on YouTube, if you are watching on Facebook, if you are watching on Rumble, if you're watching on X, if you're watching on Spotify. Is this the real pipe bomber? Yay or nay? And why? That's your assignment. I'm going to tell you my opinion on the matter, my analysis of the matter. But first, let's take a look at this man who was arrested by Kash Patel and Dan Bongino's FBI. His name is Brian Cole Jr. Last Thursday on December 4th, 2025, he was arrested in connection with placing pipe bombs outside of the DNC and RNC headquarters in Washington, D.C. on January 5th, 2021, the day before the Fedsurrection on January 6th. He is a 30-year-old man, as you can see in the photograph. He is a black man. From what we know of his background, his family says that he is autistic, that he keeps to himself, that he spends most of his time online or with his dog. His neighbors report virtually zero interaction with him, that he never speaks. His mother thinks he's innocent of this charge, but of course, anybody who thinks he's innocent or guilty, present us with the evidence, and we will weigh that evidence. His mother might be a little biased in his favor, or she might have information that exonerates him. I'm open to either possibility, as long as there's evidence to substantiate it. Opinion, I care not for. Evidence is key here. Brian Cole Jr. now faces 2 charges, federal explosives-related charges, and if convicted, each carry a maximum penalty of 20 years in prison. The 2 charges are transporting an explosive device in interstate commerce with the intent to kill, injure, or intimidate, or unlawfully destroy property. That would be 18 U.S.C. 844D. The second charge is attempted malicious destruction by means of explosive materials. That is 18 U.S.C. 844F. Those are the 2 charges that he faces. He has been arraigned in court. That's the background. That's the facts of what has happened. Now let's get to the analysis. Let's break down, is Brian Cole Jr. the real pipe bomber? Well, Kash Patel, the FBI director, and Dan Bongino, let's start actually by offering this a little more context. They explained that the way that they identified this pipe bomber was not through any new tips, not through any new evidence, but through a new team analyzing existing evidence at the FBI that had been collected by the prior FBI. So they simply looked at what the FBI in the past, in early 2021, had collected as evidence back when the FBI originally began the investigation into the pipe bomb. And Kash and Dan said that this information was right in front of them. This was at the FBI. It was, in a sense, easy to piece together the identity. It was easy to piece together the evidence to point to the identity of the alleged pipe bomber, whom they say is Brian Cole Jr. Now, I want to make one comment here that may or may not be relevant. We'll know in the coming days and weeks and months as we learn more information about this. I do wonder about the information, any information. This is not specific. Let me be very clear here. This is not specific to this particular investigation. I do wonder about trusting the old FBI's work as being a reliable narrator. Meaning, are you sure that the information that the old FBI, the corrupt FBI, collected, are you sure that it's accurate? Are you sure that it's unbiased? Are you sure that it wasn't planted? Are you... I guess my question would be, why are you confident that this information that was put together by an FBI that was weaponized against the American people is reliable? I'm not sitting here saying that we should necessarily assume that it's unreliable, but I do think if we are not substantiating evidence by the collection of new evidence, that should always be a question at the forefront of the FBI leadership's minds. Again, I'm not saying that to insinuate anything. That was just my first reaction to hearing Cash and Dan talk about how this arrest of the pipe bomber, the alleged pipe bomber, was based not on new information or new tips, but on old information that the FBI was sitting on. Is it reliable? Okay, that's comment number one. Comment number two is back on January 6th of 2025. So, 11 months ago at this point, I posted, and it was, of course, the anniversary of the Fedsurrection. I posted this on X, and I've actually had it as my pinned tweet on my X account ever since for the past 11 months because, well, I'll read it to you and you'll understand why. This is what I wrote. I said the content of the new House report, that's the Loudermilk report that I'm talking about, on the January 6th pipe bomber is shocking. The FBI tracked phone data and narrowed the suspects down to 186 phone numbers, and then down to one phone number. And then the FBI suddenly stopped the case, just ended it. Why? Who is that one person that they didn't want to reveal? The FBI agent in charge, Stephen D'Antuono, then told Congress that the phone data from a major telecom company was corrupted. But the telecom company says the data was not corrupted. The FBI lied then to cover up? Now the FBI and other agencies are stonewalling Congress over why this investigation into what we're told is the biggest domestic terror attack attempt in recent history just stopped. Oh, and the two people who found the pipe bombs on January 6th were a woman carrying a basket of laundry who's actually a swamp creature who works for an intel-connected organization where she works on, quote-unquote, disinformation, LOL. And the other, quote-unquote, bomb was found by a plainclothes Fed. Both bombs, this is what I wrote in January, sat in plain sight undetected for 15-plus hours until both were found independently within 15 minutes of each other, also within 15 minutes of the first breach of the Capitol. And the frame rate of the one video the FBI released of the pipe bomber, the video came from the DNC, was 1.2 FPS, which is lower than any security camera on the market by 8-fold, which implies that the video was tampered with? By whom? What's on the frames that were removed from the publicly released tape? I wrote on January 6th, the implications of this are enormous. We're closer than we've ever been before in totally exposing the totality of what an absolute evil hoax J6 was. And then I encouraged you. I said, don't lose steam now. Raise your voices. Get this over the finish line. Expose it all so everyone can see we aren't just crazy conspiracy theorists, that the feds actually staged J6 to demonize MAGA after Biden and his ilk rigged the election. You are the media. I wrote, make this famous, and that is exactly what you did. That post that I wrote was seen millions of times across X, which is why I've kept it pinned ever since. The reason that I'm reading that to you today is because it is important, critically important, that we understand, and I think we do, because we've talked about this a lot on the show, that we understand the implications of revealing the identity of the pipe bomber. It's not just a case that needs to be cracked. It's not just, this one dude did something wrong and needs to face accountability and justice, and finally he was arrested and is going to face that justice. While that part is true in the narrow sense, the reason it's so important to reveal this individual is because it doesn't make sense that these pipe bombs were placed in isolation. I'm not a big believer, in other words, in coincidences when the probability of such a coincidence is like minuscule. So, for example, what is the probability that both of these pipe bombs were placed on the evening of January 5th, and then both of them were left undetected for 15 hours, and then both of them were found within 15 minutes of each other, also within 15 minutes of the first breach of the Capitol? I mean, literally, mathematically, statistically, the probability of that being unconnected and a coincidence is probably like statistically almost impossible. Okay, so then coming back to Brian Cole Jr. According to the FBI, they presented a document at Brian Cole's arraignment last Friday. And this is compelling, by the way. This is very compelling evidence. They presented evidence that Brian Cole's cell phone, quote, engaged in approximately 7 data session transactions. That basically means a phone or a text message. It doesn't differentiate which. With his cell phone provider's towers between 7:39 p.m. and 8:24 p.m. in the area of the DNC and the RNC on January 5th, 2021. So, in other words, his cell phone pings located him, Brian Cole Jr., in the right place at the right time to have planted those bombs. I find that to be compelling evidence. Now, here's where it gets a little bit weird. Stephen D'Antuono, he was the former head of the Washington field office of the FBI. On June 14th of 2023, he testified in front of the House Judiciary Committee. Annoyingly, it was a closed-door session, so we couldn't watch his testimony. But we did get a readout of what he testified, and this is what he said. He said, we did, meaning the FBI, did a complete geofence, but there's some data that was corrupted by one of the providers, not purposely by them, he said. So Stephen D'Antuono testified under oath to the United States Congress that the cell phone data was corrupt and not corrupt. It wasn't corrupted by the FBI. It was corrupted by the cell phone service provider who couldn't give that data to Congress. That's why they couldn't trace, well, what Cash and Dan are providing now is evidence that Brian Cole Jr. was in the right place at the right time. These transactions, the data transactions on his cell phone, the text or the phone calls that he made that placed him in the vicinity of the pipe bombs on that day. But Stephen D'Antuono said that such information, such data was corrupted. Now, fast forward a little bit. In November of 2024, remember, D'Antuono's testimony was in 2023, in June of 2023, but in November of 2024, Congressman Barry Loudermilk revealed that all the major cell phone carriers informed Congress that they provided intact data. They were never notified of any corruption issues, which, of course, begs the question, was the FBI telling the truth to Congress when Stephen D'Antuono says that the cell phone data was corrupted? Because the cell phone companies say the data wasn't corrupted and they were never notified by the FBI or anyone else of issues with their data. That's a pretty significant lie from Stephen D'Antuono, a pretty significant conflict of information. Now, it gets a little bit more complicated. The FBI, according to the current team that runs the FBI, had the information about Brian Cole Jr. and his cell phone being within the vicinity of the RNC and the DNC during that specific window of time when the pipe bombs were planted. The FBI reportedly had that information about his phone calls and text messages and his location within weeks of January 6th, 2021. And that's when investigators found 186 cell phone numbers of interest and 130 devices of interest and began to narrow down who could potentially be the person that planted the pipe bomb. I find this part to be compelling evidence. It's not the entirety of evidence that would be needed to convict Brian Cole Jr., but it is significant that his cell phone tied him to the location where the pipe bombs were placed on January 5th. The other piece of compelling information from the Department of Justice's affidavit at Brian Cole's arraignment is this. I'm going to read it. Cole is the registered owner, says the Department of Justice, of a 2017 Nissan Sentra with a Virginia license plate. On January 5th, 2021, at approximately 7:10 p.m., Cole's Nissan Sentra was observed driving past a license plate reader at the South Capitol Street exit from Interstate 395 South, which is less than 1/2 mile from the location where the individual who placed the devices was first observed on foot near North Carolina and New Jersey Avenues Southeast at 7:34 p.m. Approximately 5 minutes later at 7:39:27 p.m., The Cole cell phone began to interact with provider towers in that area. End quote. Okay. Again, another piece of compelling evidence. So not only did his cell phone place him in the vicinity of where these pipe bombs were planted, his car and his license tag was also identified as being just a half mile away from those locations at that time. Very compelling evidence. Very compelling evidence. Now, here's where I have some questions. The FBI says that Brian Cole Jr. purchased materials consistent with the components of the pipe bombs. They traced his credit cards to these purchases, which, by the way, were you aware that when you make a purchase somewhere, that it's not just that your credit card company knows that you made a purchase at that vendor, but they know the exact item that you purchased? Were you aware that credit card companies track this? Isn't this chilling and creepy? However, again, that in and of itself, it was just that sentence. That's compelling. However, Brian Cole Jr. is alleged to have first purchased these materials in October of 2019. That is a year and 3 months, 15 months before January 6th, and even a year before the election itself. That seems a little odd to me. I'm not saying that shatters the FBI's case. It surprised me. Typically, when someone commits a crime and they have to purchase materials that they're going to use in the commission of this crime, it's much closer to the date that the crime is allegedly committed, not over a year beforehand and before the election even took place. My reaction to that was, that's a little surprising. So here are the questions. Now, the big question, of course, is Brian Cole Jr. the pipe bomber? And my answer to that is, I don't know. I don't know. The FBI has presented some compelling evidence, but we do have a lot of evidence that we have not yet seen, and we have bigger questions that are as yet unanswered. And we may find out the answers to these questions in the coming days and weeks and months. They may, of necessity, be keeping these details quiet because they don't want to pollute the prosecution in any way. That's possible. But my biggest question is, what was Brian Cole Jr.'s motive? Why would he place these pipe bombs if he did, in fact, place these pipe bombs? Now, of course, the Democrats in the immediate aftermath of January 6th told us that this was some mega plot to harm Kamala Harris because she was at the DNC at the time that the pipe bomb was right next to, or was placed outside of that headquarters building. That, of course, there was never any evidence to substantiate that allegation. That was just the left and the mainstream media's effort to vilify President Trump supporters, to portray us all as being violent. They had no evidence for it. And by the way, we saw a little repetition of this in the last couple days because we have not yet established Brian Cole Jr.'s motive. And of course, immediately, the left and the mainstream media try to portray Brian Cole Jr. as being a Trump supporter or a quote-unquote election denier. And there's no evidence of this. So what was his motive is a pivotal question here. The second pivotal question is those 7 data transactions that Brian Cole did on January 5th in the vicinity of where the pipe bombs were placed. Again, they could have been phone calls, they could have been text messages. It wasn't specified in the affidavit. Who was he communicating with? Like, was he texting his mom? Or was he texting friends? Or was there a co-conspirator? Or like, who was he communicating with? This is critical to understand. After January 6th, once the FBI had initially begun their investigation and they'd collected enough information, according to Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, to actually identify who the pipe bomber was, who stopped that investigation internally? There had to have been at least one person, if not more than one person, but it has to be at the very least one person who said, we've come this far and we're not going a step further. And now we know from Kash Patel and Dan Bongino that it's not because they came to a dead end. There was some reason why the FBI at the time did not want to make Brian Cole's name public. So who stopped the investigation and why? And why did Stephen D'Antuono, the former head of the Washington field office, why did he lie about cell phone data being corrupted if that was never true? If this cell phone data existed within the FBI so clearly, so completely, that Kash Patel and Dan Bongino and their teams were able to put the evidence together to then reveal to us the identity of the alleged pipe bomber, why did Stephen D'Antuono lie about that? The reason that these questions are so important is because of the implications of the pipe bombs themselves. Again, going back to that post that I made on X January of this year, I just don't believe that the probability of a coincidence that some lone wolf, unconnected to any political motive, unconnected to any person, randomly put materials together that he'd purchased 15 months ago and decided to place them outside of the RNC and the DNC for what? No reason at all? And I want to be very clear here. I don't know if Brian Cole Jr. is a pipe bomber or not. He might be. Like I said, there's Kash and Dan present compelling evidence in their FBI document that was presented at the arraignment. That is compelling evidence. But it doesn't. The reason that I think celebration is slightly premature is because the reason that it was important that we identify the pipe bomber is because of the role that the pipe bombs played in the Fedsurrection the next day. That these pipe bombs were intended to draw Capitol Police away from the Capitol for the breach of the Capitol that was instigated by the feds. That's the importance of the identity of the pipe bomber, not just that he himself is held accountable. And maybe these questions will all be answered in a very cut and dry way as this prosecution unfolds. Maybe the FBI is truly trying to leave the prosecution completely uncorrupted, because it's hard to impanel a jury when everyone and their brother is aware or has heard news coverage and opinions and theories about whatever case that they are going to be deciding on. Maybe that's why we don't have answers to these questions, but these are significant questions that need to be answered. And how do I phrase this? Keep in mind, even further context here. Stephen D'Antuono, this FBI agent who was the former chief of the Washington field office, who it appears committed perjury and lied to Congress about corrupted phone data when the phone data wasn't corrupted, both according to the cell phone carriers and, now the current FBI, because they literally use data to put together, to solve this case. Keep in mind that Stephen D'Antuono also oversaw the Gretchen Whitmer Fednapping, which was supposed to portray all lockdown skeptics during COVID as being violent militia. And then all of a sudden, after the Gretchen Whitmer Fednapping, all of a sudden Stephen D'Antuono is moved to Washington, D.C. a month before the election. There is so much corruption at play on January 6th and on January 5th that my reaction, if it seems muted, if I'm not here like, I can't believe we solved this. This is the best day ever. We've been talking about the pipe bomber and solving this case for years, and it's finally been happened. If my reaction is not that, it's only because the biggest questions and the most important questions related to the pipe bomber are not answered yet. It's not even necessarily, I wouldn't even portray it necessarily as disbelief that Brian Cole is the pipe bomber. My absolutely frank analysis is, I don't know. Some of the evidence is compelling, but there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. That's my analysis. That's my answer. I don't know if he is or not. It's very compelling that his cell phone was in the area and that the license tag of his car was monitored and identified within a half mile of where he then supposedly planted these pipe bombs. But again, what was his motive? Who was he communicating with? Who stopped this investigation at the FBI and why? Why did Stephen D'Antuono lie? Why was Stephen D'Antuono moved to the Washington field office? I personally, and you can tell me if you disagree with me, I personally will not be satisfied with any investigation or the result of any investigation into the January 6th pipe bombs until all of those questions are answered. And maybe we'll get answers to them sooner or later. Maybe we will. I think we should demand it from Congress and from the FBI. Because those are the questions that expose the deep state targeting us. And if we're not able to actually put names to the politicians or the feds, the intel community operatives who staged these things, then great, good on the FBI for finding the pipe bomber if they convict him. That's great. I'm all about justice. Someone committed a crime, I want to see them convicted of it. But the bigger implications have to be answered. The questions that would indicate, the questions that would implicate politicians and deep state operatives have to be answered before I will feel celebratory about this. And I'm going to look at all your comments to see if you believe that Brian Cole Jr. is the real pipe bomber or not. He might be. I will be watching and reading all the information from his trial in detail, and we will analyze it as it goes because we will find answers to these questions. I mean, it's been 5 years. We're not stopping now. We are not stopping now. Okay, guys, make sure you're subscribed to the show. We have a really significant episode for you planned tomorrow. You do not want to miss that. Subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/Liz Wheeler. Make sure you hit that notification bell so that as soon as that episode drops, you are among the first to see it. You do not want to miss it. On Spotify, we are The Liz Wheeler Show. Just search my name. You'll see my face. Hit subscribe. Leave us a 5-star review if you would be so kind. I know a lot of you have done that already, and I thank you for it. But if a couple more of you every day do that, then more people will be able to discover the show on Spotify. All right. That is all for today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show.